We are in a series called It's Time, and one of the, we've gotten all kind of feedback from you, which is great. We want to let you know that, when we choose our series, we choose them because we're trying to just base the climate of not only where our church congregation is at, but also what's going on in our world. And so we've been looking at certain characters in the Bible and how they responded to the call of God. And what we're finding is this, two things, basically. Number one, God is always calling us into relationship with Him. And then number two, God is always calling us into His purpose. And for us, discovering meaning in life, discovering our direction, discovering our purpose in life is determined by how we respond when God calls to you and I. And the thing I love about the Bible is just so real. It was written in a really tumultuous time. So a lot of the things that people are going through are really difficult moments. Not similar, but similar to, we're coming out of a difficult year, a difficult moment. There's always difficulties in our lives. But the really interesting thing is that God calls people who've got serious situations going on in their own personal lives, right? A guy named Thomas who's got incredible doubts, a guy named Peter who's got incredible failures, a guy named Abraham who's got an impossible situation that he's supposed to trust God for, a guy named Moses who's got incredible inadequacies. God calls people, these people I can relate to. Anybody else? These are folks like Esther, a woman who was born in a difficult situation, really unlikely. God calls them into His purpose, and when they respond, when they say yes to God, they find strength in Him, and God uses them to do things that are so much bigger and beyond them. And today I love what we're going to talk about today. This guy named Joseph. I'm going to talk about a story that of all the stories in the Old Testament, which is the part of the Bible that happens before Jesus comes on the scene. This one is like, if you think your life is unfair, Joseph will make you really feel good about your unfairness. His life is so unfair. The things that happen to him are so seemingly incredibly unfair and set him up for a miserable life. How could God use anybody like that? And the book of Genesis, which is probably one of the most important books of the Bible, over a quarter of the book is dedicated to this guy's life. So today we're going to look at the story because it is really hard at times to respond to the call of God, but especially when your life is not moving in the direction of your plans, your dreams, and your desires. Especially when there are events and circumstances that are just kind of thrust onto your life, things that you didn't choose. That's when it's really difficult, especially when you feel like things are unfair and you have an unfair advantage or disadvantage. That's when it's really difficult to respond. So today I'm going to ask one question for you to consider that will help you navigate those moments when God calls to you, but your life is not moving in the direction of your plans or your dreams, or unfair circumstances or events happen. I'm going to ask you a question to consider to help you navigate those. But before I get to that question, I want to ask you this other question. What if in your life you responded and you had the perspective and outlook that God was with you, and that God was with you in every situation? In every situation. Now, I love what Chris mentioned, which is it's really easy for us to believe that God is with us when things seem to be going well, when the bank account is strong, when relationships are healthy. But how about when unexpected things happen? How about through that divorce? How about through that bad grade that you got? How about through that job that you had to take because the one that you really wanted you didn't get? How about in family challenges, marriage challenges, conflict, crisis? How about in just betrayal that you've gone through in your workplace? One of the reasons why I'm doing this one today in particular is because I've heard stories of betrayal in the workplace. Man, those are tough things. When you didn't really do anything, but people did things to you, or even in your family when that kind of thing happens. How about then? How about then? Is God with you? And what would it be like if you adopted the perspective that God is with me even then, or especially then? How about in physical disabilities? Here's a guy named Nick Vujicic. I think he's the embodiment of somebody who lives with a perspective that God is with me in every situation. He was born, that's not photoshopped, he was born with no legs, no arms. Yeah. And he has made a powerful impact in our world, in my life, in many of our lives. This is his beautiful wife and family. He's got 4 kids now. What would it be like if you took the outlook that God was with you in every situation? If you had absolute certainty and confidence that God is with me, he is in this situation. Not only is he in this situation, but he has a plan in the midst of this situation. What would it be like? Now, here's the reality that all of us live in. We know this. We don't control the things that are thrown at us. COVID has made that abundantly clear, right? We do not control the things. We're going to experience things in this life that we never wanted to happen, that we never asked to happen. But we do control something. We have this ability, this powerful ability that when we engage in it, it takes bad things and it turns them into good things. It takes wrong things and makes them right. It takes attempts by people to thwart us with evil intention, and it thwarts their plans. It can change the course of our life. Now, here's the issue with this thing also, is that if we don't engage in, and it's really easy to overlook this, especially in crisis. If we don't engage with it, we can begin to live and see ourselves as victims. And instead of living the life that we have the opportunity to live, we live the life that we feel like the victimization has pushed us into. So what is this thing? What is this thing that we have the ability to do? This is what we have the ability to do. We have the ability to respond rather than react to the circumstances of our life. We have the ability to, it is a powerful ability. We have the ability to choose a response in any given situation rather than have that response dictated to us by our circumstances. And so this guy, Joseph, is this incredible study in this. And this is Joseph, and we're going to read through the parts of the book of Joseph. But at the end of the book of Joseph, this is what Joseph says. This is the conclusion that he comes to. He says this: you intended to harm me. And the people who had power had evil intention in their heart, and their evil intention was against Joseph to harm him. He said, you intended to harm me. And some of you may feel like that in your workplace right now. You may feel like that maybe even in your family or in a relationship or in a situation. There's people maybe that they have an evil intention behind what they're doing. But he has a different perspective. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. It sounds crazy, right? But we're going to see through Joseph's life that God's purpose and God's intention was revealed and became reality through a young man's perpetual decision, catalytic decision, unexpected decision to respond to circumstances that you and I can't even begin to imagine how difficult they were. And there was nothing in the moment in each individual response that would indicate that God was there or doing anything. I mean, in the moment, none of his responses seemed to amount to anything. None of his responses seemed to have a practical difference. However, at the end of his life, when you add up all of the individual, every single one of them, you see what God has done as he has chosen to respond to his circumstances in a way that honors God. But you don't get to see it in the moment. You get to see it at the end. And so Joseph's story begins like this. There's a guy named Abram who God comes to and calls him out of where he is. And God calls him to follow him, and God calls him and says, look, I'm going to bless the entire world through your family. You're going to become a father of many nations through one of those nations. I'm going to bring forth the Messiah and bless the entire world. And so Abraham has a son named Isaac. He didn't look like that. He looked probably better than that. Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. Those 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel, which eventually becomes the nation of Israel, through which God's going to bring forth a Messiah. He has 12 sons, and one of those sons is Joseph. And the entire plan of God, believe it or not, hinges on the responses of this young man who is 17 years old. Anybody 17 in here? Online, on screen, close to 17? Okay. Hands are going up all over here. Joking. 17 years old, and this is how Joseph's life begins. Now remember this, Joseph has no idea what the end of his life and story are going to be. He's living in it now. And so this is what happens. Now Israel, who is Jacob, his daddy, he loved Joseph more than any of the other sons. And he made an ornate robe for him. If you're a parent or soon to be a parent, Don't do this, okay? You got multiple children, don't do this. This was a robe that was actually supposed to go to the firstborn child. It was a decorated robe. It basically meant that I don't do manual labor. That's what it meant. He goes down to the 10th, to the 11th child and gives it to the 11th, the youngest at that time. What do you think the other brothers are like? They don't like him. They don't like dad. They don't like the son. They're really mad. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than them, they hated him. And they couldn't even speak a kind word to him. Can you imagine the tension? And now Joseph seems to be a really positive guy. Joseph had a dream. And when he told the dream to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Okay, so what was the dream? This is the gist of the dream. He had two dreams. The gist of the dream was that all the sons and even mom and dad one day were going to bow down and pay homage to Joseph. Can you imagine him coming home? God, show me this. And he's so excited. Let me tell you this dream. He gets the whole family around. This is, one day you're all going to bow down and worship me. What the? We hated you before, but now we hate you. I mean, I don't know how we could hate you more, but we hate you more. I mean, they were ticked off. Joseph, so here's what happens. Daddy sends them. One day they're all out working because remember, Joseph has the coat. He doesn't work. He's doing something else. Daddy sends him to go check on them. Make sure they're working. Make sure they're doing what I asked. And so Joseph comes out. And from a distance, they see him. And they begin thinking evil thoughts. They're thinking about how they can kill this guy. Daddy's favorite, man, I'm tired of all these dreams about us bowing down to him. Who does he think he is? And as Joseph is walking to make sure that they're doing what Dad said to do, they're thinking about how to kill him. They saw him from a distance, and before he reached them, they'd plotted to kill him. They had already thought about, this is what we're going to do. And the older brother steps in and he says, look, we can't kill this guy, but we can put him in a pit, and let's think about it. So they come up with this idea. Well, he's in the pit. They're eating lunch. He's in a pit. They think about, instead of killing him, let's sell him to slave traders. And let's take his coat that Daddy gave him and tear it up. Let's put goat's blood on it. Let's take it to Dad, and we'll say, Dad, we don't know what happened to Joseph, but look, we found this. It looks like an animal tore him to shreds, killed him. I think your son is dead. So that's what they do. They sell him to slave traders. Now, some of you got sibling problems. That's sibling. That's a huge sibling problem, right? That's a situation that you don't want to have. So Joseph finds himself in a foreign land as a slave to a guy named Potiphar. Let me find me. So right now, his life is completely disrupted, right? You have circumstances in your life. How do you respond when your life is not moving in the direction of your dreams? Because Joseph's life right now is not moving in the direction of everybody bowing down to me one day. Not at all. He's a slave of a guy named Potiphar in some guy's house. His daddy thinks he's dead. There are going to be moments in our lives when events and circumstances come in, but how do you respond to those moments and events that come in like this? Now, Joseph, I think, had a perspective. Joseph had a perspective that I think God wants us to adopt, because the temptation is for us to believe that God has abandoned us, and so we abandon God, or we at least walk away from his call. But what if, and we don't, maybe you haven't heard this story before, you may not know what's going to happen, but what if Joseph had at any time abandoned God? He would never have seen what God was doing or could have done in the midst of this. But Joseph seems to have a different picture in his own mind about God and himself. Joseph saw his life as a small part of a much bigger story. It was God's story. So Joseph saw all the events in his life, not just as pertaining to him and his own deliverance and his own well-being. He saw it as part of God's bigger story. He saw the story really as all about God and not all about himself. Now, this is not written specifically. I'm just kind of reading into this, the way that he responds, because he's going to make these God-honoring responses in the midst of circumstances where it pretty much seems like God has abandoned him. But here's what I want you and I to get. Your life is part of a bigger story. and the things that are happening in your life, even the desires and dreams that you have to get a job, maybe to get married, and you've been going, man, when's that going to happen? I'm supposed to happen when I was X, Y, Z, and now I'm this, and it hasn't happened yet, and you feel like your life is moving in a different direction in your dreams. All the dreams and desires that we have are part of a much bigger story. They're God's story. They're God's bigger story. This is really more about God than it is about us and our story. And so Joseph is going to respond as somebody who's part of a bigger story, because there's a story that overrides all of our stories, and it's the fact that God has created you and I to live for the glory of Him. And when you make God-honoring decisions, you may not see the product of it in the moment, but in hindsight, you'll be able to look back when we respond in God-honoring ways and see what God has done. And that's what's going to happen to Joseph. Now, back to the story. Everything is pretty quiet right now. I mean, Joseph is a prisoner, and you could imagine he's thinking that God has somehow abandoned him. The Lord, however, in chapter 2 of 39, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Again, you're going, wait a minute, what? If the Lord was with him, wouldn't he have stopped his brothers from selling him as a slave? And if the Lord was with him, wouldn't he have saved him by now and gotten him out of this? In fact, when God is with us, don't we usually think that when God is, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it this way. When God is with you, don't we usually think that things work out for you? I mean, isn't that what it means to be a follower of Christ? When God is with us, things work out for us. Now, maybe you've learned that, in your church experience or whatever it might be. But if you believe that, you need to know this, that Christians have never believed that. Throughout the history of Christianity in the Bible, Christians have never believed that. Christians have never just believed that because, and some people have walked away from faith. In fact, a lot of people walked away from faith and believing in God because they couldn't reconcile the fact that there is this good God and there's all the suffering and evil that exists. In fact, some of it touches the lives of everybody. Some good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people. And because they couldn't reconcile that, they left faith because they didn't believe in that kind of a God. And let me just say, if you're one of those people, it's okay. No worries. Because that kind of a God doesn't actually exist. The kind of God that says that if you follow me and I'm good, that nothing bad will ever happen to your life, that kind of God actually doesn't exist. The God in the Bible, in fact, the people, men and women who follow God in the Scriptures over and over, they found themselves in extraordinarily difficult situations. But in those situations, they discovered that God was not only with them in it, God was with them through it. In every one of those situations, God was with them in it, and He was with them through it. And Joseph is discovering this in this moment. And so Joseph acts as one who, maybe in the moment there wasn't justice, maybe in the moment there wasn't fairness, maybe in the moment there wasn't the idea of prosperity, but in the moment God was there. God was with him. And Joseph chose to live as if God was really with him in this. And so he ended up being faithful as a slave. And this is what it says. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything, Potiphar, he put him in charge of his entire household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. Everything he owned. From that time, he put him in charge of the household and all that he owned. He blessed, and the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. The blessing of God was on Joseph because God was with Joseph. The blessing of Joseph and God were on the house because Joseph was in the house. The blessing of God. If you were to look at his life, you go like, wait a minute. Blessing of God, what are you talking about? He chose to be faithful to Potiphar. Joseph responded as if God was with him, even though it looked like God had abandoned him. He made a choice to respond and to serve Potiphar as if he were serving the Lord, even though he could have taken this moment. And here's why I think this is real important. Oftentimes we blame our decisions, our directions, our situation in life on either somebody else or on God. And Joseph chose not to do that. Joseph chose to believe that God was with him even in this terrible situation. God had not abandoned me. I'm not going to live like God did. I'm going to live like God is with me in this situation. And because he did, God blessed Joseph and God blessed the household of Potiphar in this moment. So here's the question I want to ask you to consider. What would it look like, or how would someone in your circumstances respond if they, like Joseph, if they believed that God was with them In your work betrayal, how would somebody respond if they believed that God was with them? In your family situation, how would somebody respond if they believed that God was with them? In your entire life, how would they respond if they believed that God was really with them in it? Again, Joseph has no evidence that God is with him. In fact, if anything, it seems like God has abandoned him. But he responds as if God is with him. He responds as if, and God, these responses over time, they add up. So this is the question that I want you to wrestle with. What would that look like, and what does that mean for you? Because here's what Joseph's going to find, that these responses that he makes in a way to honor God, over time, they do something. They give him a perspective, and God accomplishes his plan in ways that he could never imagine. But right now, he can't imagine it because he can't see the end of the story. So here's what I would encourage you to do. Never underestimate the power of a God-honoring response in your life. Even if in the moment, you don't see the product of it. Never underestimate the power of forgiving somebody who doesn't deserve to be forgiven. Even if in the moment, you don't see the repercussions of it. Never underestimate the power of choosing to do what's right, even if you don't. So here's what Joseph does. He chooses to do what's right. He chooses to do what's right. His master put him in charge of everything. And then basically, here's what happens, is the wife of Potiphar sees him doing work. It's kind of like the pool boy in the proverbial movie, right? Pool boy's out scrubbing the pool, and the wife's husband is gone. She sees him and goes, well, my husband's been gone a lot. I kind of deserve this. And Joseph could have said, hey, God, you abandoned me here. I deserve this. Nobody will ever know. But instead of cutting corners, he doesn't cut corners. She just seduces him day after day after day after day. She says the same thing. Come to bed with me. And she's not inviting him to take a nap. She's saying, come to bed with me. And Joseph could have said, yeah, you know what? I mean, God, where are you? Where have you been? What have you done for me lately? And nobody's going to know. They think I'm dead. I'm in a foreign country. Nobody even knows that I'm here. He could have cut corners, but he doesn't. He responds in a way that honors God. And so here's what he says to her, and listen to the words when he says this. But he refused. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you're his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against, he didn't say Potiphar. He didn't say, how could I do this to your husband? He says, how can I do such a wicked thing and dishonor God with this response? Again, his life was part of a bigger picture. He goes, how can I do this against God? Even if nobody knew, even if your husband never found out, how could I do this against God, who I live for? And he chose a God-honoring response when it would have been so easy not to. And his reward for that? Freedom, release, you're the greatest. No, he gets thrown in prison. She claims that he tried to rape her. And so when husband comes back, he tried to rape me. He's making fun of me. And so here's what happens. He gets thrown in prison. But while in prison, he was there in prison, the Lord was with him. Again, when you read where the Lord is with him, you're kind of like, okay, first you were with him in a pit, and now as a slave, and now as a prisoner. The Lord is with him and showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And Joseph lived his life choosing to be faithful as a prisoner. In fact, he used the gift that God had given him to serve a couple of the prisoners. 2 prisoners came to him and they said, man, we had this dream and we can't figure out what this dream means. And so one of them was a butler. He was the right-hand guy of the king. And so he told Joseph the dream, and Joseph basically says, hey, I got good news for you. Your dream tells me, God is telling me that your dream, well, in fact, let me read this. Both had dreams, they said, but there's no one to interpret. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God. Tell me your dreams. And so he tells them the dream, and he says, 3 days, you're going to be taken out of this prison, and you're going to be restored. And you're going to get your job back. You got fired, but you're going to get your job back. So then the baker goes, well, that was good. Maybe mine will be good too. So the baker tells him his dream, and Joseph says, here's the interpretation for your dream. In 3 days, the king is going to impale you. You know what impale means? He's going to put you on a stake, and the birds of the air are going to eat your flesh off your skin. That's what God says. And those two things happen. And the butler tells him, Joseph, I will not forget you. When the king restores me, I will tell him about you. And 2 years go by, and he forgot. So Joseph's reward for being a faithful prisoner and using his gift to serve the other prisoners was to be forgotten for 2 years. And then 1 year, the king has a dream, and it bugs him. And the king wants an interpretation for this dream. And so here's what happens in chapter 41. But Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream. When 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. Now, who's at his right hand hearing everything that Pharaoh says? The butler. 2 years later, the butler goes, oh my gosh, that's right. I was supposed to tell you about this guy. Totally forgot. Sorry. There was a guy that interpreted my dream. His name is Joseph. Where you been? And so 2 years later, Pharaoh comes to Joseph and says, hey, look, I hear that you can interpret dreams. He says this, I have a dream. No one can interpret it, but I've heard about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And watch this. This is really interesting. Joseph says, I can't. But, Joseph replied, but God will give Pharaoh the answer. I can't, but God does. Now, if you were living in their day, everybody would have been like, oh no, he didn't just say that. Here's why. Because Pharaoh thought he was God. But Pharaoh can't make out the dream. So basically, Joseph boldly says, Pharaoh, you're not really God. But I know God. You're God, even if you don't acknowledge him. And he can interpret your dream. So Pharaoh's like, okay. Again, let me ask you this question. How would somebody in your circumstances respond if you knew that God was with you? What kind of boldness might come out of your life in the moments where you're tempted to cower back? Joseph could have basically said, hey, I'll figure it out for you. He didn't. He said, you're not God, but God will figure it out and tell me. There's a boldness that came. Joseph was faithful as a servant of Pharaoh. So after Pharaoh hears Joseph's interpretation of the dream, he's blown away. Joseph not only interprets the dream, but he comes up with a plan. And basically the dream was this. For 7 years, there's going to be an abundance of food in Egypt. And then after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. It is going to decimate everybody. And unless you prepare for the 7 years of famine, Egypt will cease to be. And so Joseph gives them a plan. This is what you need to do. And Pharaoh looks at him and goes, man, dude, you know exactly what we need to do. Why don't you do it? Now think about this. He's a prisoner one day, and the next day he is right-hand man to the most powerful nation man in the world at that time. Prisoner. From a pit to a prison to now the palace. All by the hand of God. Because he's making responses that honor God. Even in the moment if he can't see the result of those responses. He gets elevated to the right hand. He provides, and all the world after 7 years is going hungry. Joseph is now in his 40s. He's about 39, 40 years old. Remember, 17 when he got thrown into the pit, 30 when he was in the prison, and now 40. And who do you think gets hungry? The Israelites. The family of Jacob gets hungry. And so they tell him, the very ones that threw him into that pit 23 years ago, go to Egypt, we need food. There's food in Egypt. So the brothers show up, and they're standing before the most powerful man in the world at that point, other than Pharaoh. And they're asking for food, and they don't recognize him. And if you've ever wondered, how could they not recognize? He was a brother. Well, this is 23 years later. He was a young man. Now he's an adult man. And he looks like an Egyptian, which means he's got the wardrobe of an Egyptian. He's got the makeup of an Egyptian. It's like us wearing the mask, right? I mean, how many people have you not recognized because all you get to see is that? They don't recognize him. And so they're standing before him and they're pleading for food. And Joseph recognizes them. And this is what happens. Joseph said to his brothers, they don't know he recognizes. Actually, at this point, they do. Come close to me. Now, can you imagine how frightened they are? This is the one that they sold as a slave 23 years earlier. And he says, come close to me. He just, at this point, his heart is broken for his family. He is serving God as a faithful, wounded brother. And so Joseph said, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I'm your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. And he just kind of like reminds them, remember that 23 years ago? I don't think he said it like that. I just said it like that. Remember, he didn't say it like, remember? You sold me. But now look at his perspective. Now, don't be distressed. Don't be angry for yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. You sold me, but it was to save lives that God sent me. He has a perspective. He says this in verse 8, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. When we live and respond in a way that communicates that we believe that God is with us in everything, here's what we do. We gain a perspective that cannot be gained in any other way. In this moment, Joseph has already come to the conclusion that you did not send me here. In fact, the pit, the prison, the suffering, me being sold twice as a slave, me being forgotten those many years, that was all part of God's plan. He was in it all. Did he mean for that to happen? I don't know, but he was in it all, and he's used it for his plan. And Joseph gains a perspective. And look, this is the important point. You will not gain the perspective that God is behind the circumstances of your life if you do not respond with faith to the circumstances of your life. If he had reacted to the circumstances of his life, he would have missed the opportunity to see what God had been doing all along. And what nobody knew at this moment is that the entire salvation of our world, the fact that you and I can have a faith in Jesus Christ today, hinged on the responses of a young man who was being unjustly treated. Because those 12 men that stood in front of Joseph became the 12 tribes of Israel, became the nations of Israel, from which one of the nations would come the Messiah, Jesus, who would do for the entire world the same thing that Joseph is about to do for his 12 brothers right there, right then, in that moment. Give them forgiveness. But the world would never have known that had Joseph not made a series of God-honoring responses. So let me just ask you, as we just kind of bring to a close, what hinges on the responses that you have the opportunity to make? This is our opportunity. These moments of crisis, these moments where these unexpected events and circumstances are thrown into our lives, these are our moments to respond in a way that honors God. These are our moments to find God in the midst of it. And even when we can't find, trust that he is with us and that he has a plan even in the worst and most difficult of situations. And because Joseph does this, God brings forth salvation to the entire world. And this is how the story ends. He says this, his brothers then came to him and they threw themselves down before him. And they said, we are your slaves. This is at the end of their interaction with each other. Joseph's dad had died. And so they thought that when Joseph's dad, Jacob, died, then Joseph was going to exact his revenge. Joseph's perspective is totally changed because he has responded faithfully and God has shown him that it wasn't just what your brothers did and what the Potiphar did and what everybody else did. I was behind it. I was working in it. I had a plan. Because you honored me, he fulfilled his plan. He says this, but Joseph said to them, do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? In other words, am I God? Do I have control over these things? You intended to harm me. I know. The evil in your heart, you intended to do me bad. But God had another purpose. God's purpose was for good, to accomplish what is now being done. So look, this is the bigger part of our choosing to honor God in these moments. He says, this is what happened, the saving of many lives. God foresaw this moment, and he's used all these things and he's worked in all these things. And because I've responded in this way, we've come to this moment now where God has used me to bring forth the saving of many lives. And the Egyptians were saved because there was food for the Egyptians. And the Israelites were saved because there was food for the Israelites. And the future nation of Israel was saved because Joseph went from a pit to a prison to the palace of God and served God faithfully. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of your decision to honor God with your response. Even in situations, I should say especially in situations that are unfair, that you did not ask for, that you did not deserve. God works through it all, and here's what he does. He saves people. And then we're coming out of a worship team, come and join me. As we come out of this COVID moment, we're coming into an environment where there's been a lot of pain, similar to like the famine that they experienced. Think about this. God used this famine to bring all the people to Egypt, including Joseph's family. God uses pain to bring us to the place of salvation, to the place where we can receive his provision for us. There's been so much pain. I think one of the beauties and one of the benefits we're tempted to kind of look at this last season and go, well, man, my life and everything has just been on pause. Has it? Has it? I don't think so. I think maybe God has been doing more than he has probably been accessed to do in previous seasons. He's done more to tenderize and to draw people to this place of salvation like he did through the famine. He uses transition, he uses tension, he uses crisis to get our attention, to bring us to the place of awareness and openness. I believe that God is doing that once again. But notice what it is that brings forth the salvation. It is one man's response to a multiple series of interactions where each individual interaction, you really can't see any practical, tangible difference at the time. But when you look back, when you respond in faith, when you respond as if God is with you, you're able to look back and see how God was involved in everything that you couldn't see in the moment. And he brought forth salvation not only for a nation of Egypt, for the nation of Israel, and for eventually for you and I. All because of somebody's God-honoring responses. I believe that God wants to do that with our lives as followers of Christ in this world. I believe that a watching world is going, how do followers of Christ handle crisis? Do we infight with each other? Do we just engage? Do we engage on social media just like everybody else? Or do we respond differently? Do we engage in the injustice in our world in a way that shows that God is a God who says, man, I want you to act justly. I want you to love mercy. I want you to walk humbly before your God. What kind of responses to the things going on? Will we just withdraw and go, well, I'm just going to sit this one out? I believe God's saying, no. Come on, take a step into this moment because it is our responses to the moment that will show the world what salvation looks like in this moment. And so I'm praying for us. That's why we're doing this series, that we would continue to say yes to God. And as we do that, trust him to work through our lives in this beautiful world that he loves and that he's created. Amen. Pray with me today. Father, we thank you, God, that in every one of the moments of our lives, you are there. I'm just going to pray for me and just say, God, it's honestly, it is so hard sometimes to believe and to live in a way that just confidently says, Lord, you're in this moment. Maybe some of you feel like that, man. You've been in a moment of betrayal and you're just like, really? God, you're there. He is. He's there. And he has a plan in it. Did he make that happen? I don't know about that. But does he work through it? I know that, most definitely. It doesn't just mean that, well, I guess that's just God's will. But God, you are with us in every moment and you have a plan in it. God, we see it in Joseph's life. We see the way that you work, Lord, and it gives us incredible confidence to live in our present circumstances, knowing, God, that you are with us. So, Lord, I pray that you would give us the courage and the faith to respond to every situation, especially the ones that we didn't choose, especially the ones that seem to be moving us further away from the dream in our hearts, the plans that we have. As we're praying this morning, those of you that just are going through something in your life, you're just feeling like, man, I didn't ask for this. Maybe it's just unfair, it's unjust. And you're wondering where God is. I want to invite you to open up your heart and just say, God, help me to believe that you are here with me in it. And God, help me to live and to respond as if you are here with me in it. And that you have a plan to use it. So Lord, I pray for all of those that are in their situations right now. Lord, I pray that you would give them the courage and the confidence to choose a God-honoring response, trusting that as they do, Lord, it will result in your greater glory and even in the salvation of people around us. Lord, we thank you for that. You are Jireh. You're the God who sees, Lord. You see the beginning to the end and the end to the beginning. You see everything and you provide for it all. That's the God that we're trusting in. That's the God that's with us. We thank you for that. In Jesus' powerful name. Amen. Hey, thank you for watching the Grace Honolulu YouTube channel. Hit that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. You'll receive weekly content like sermons and worship music. Great stuff. Also, you can follow us on social media, and if you'd like to give, go to gracehonolulu.org. Have a great week. Look forward to seeing you next week right here online. God bless you.